mute. That should do the trick. Right. Many apologies for that. I'm now hopefully back on with audio. I'm not quite sure why the mic was muted, but there it was. So I'll just run over what I've just said again. It's show number 265 this morning. It's Sunday 21st. We're an hour early today. Due to the fact I'm off to a barbecue at lunchtime. So Kevin and Christine have all looked in, and you now have audio, one hopes. So today's show, the government are rolling out self-driving vehicles on the roads as early as 2025, or at least that's the hope. The RAC say don't buy fuel at supermarkets, and I'll explain why that is. Kawasaki have shown off a hybrid and an electric motorcycle at Suzuka, the 8-hour endurance race, one of the biggest public showcases there is in the world. The dvla are under fire on Twitter, and they have launched a new complaints portal. The two may not be entirely unconnected. If you want a classic motorcycle owned by a classic television star, then I think you have missed the opportunity to buy Steve McQueen's Husqvarna. I think it was on sale on Friday. Coventry-based Maving, who I have talked about on a couple of occasions on the show, have now got 100 million, a 1 million funding input to boost their e-bike production. We'll have a quick look at an inexpensive cable lock from Oxford, something I talked about as being useful on a trip just a few days ago on one of my articles online on Facebook. And finally, I'll come back to the self-driving cars, and I'll ask if Grant Shapps' timetable of 2025 to release fully autonomous vehicles on the roads is reasonable or even viable. So, right, everybody says they can hear me, which is great news. So settle yourselves down for the next 35 minutes or so whilst I trundle on with today's news. Right, so as you probably remember, the government made some changes to the highway code earlier this year, which paved the way for the first self-driving vehicles. And on Friday, they actually followed that up by unveiling proposals for a widespread rollout of self-driving vehicles on UK roads. Now, this is set in 3 years' time, less than 3 years, if we say we're actually most of the way through 2022, because the date is set for 2025. Now, announcing the move on Friday, August the 19th, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said the benefits of self-driving vehicles have the potential to be huge, and that they would spark a transport revolution by improving road safety and better connecting communities. So what is in the proposals? Well, briefly, the government expects vehicles to be capable of driving themselves for the whole journey to be available by 2025. And these would not need anyone on board with a license. Now, I think the kind of thing that they are thinking about is something like this. As far as I know, this is a self-driving bus from Berlin. And although the government press release mentions no details of self-driving cars for personal use yet, the example cited did include vehicles used for public transport, such as presumably something not dissimilar to this, or for delivery. But they basically suggesting that they could revolutionize public transport and passenger travel for those who don't drive and those who live in rural communities, which seems a bit of a long shot to me, but there we go. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, Shapps, who has already come under fire in the last few days for his seemingly off-the-cuff remarks about cycle speed limits, cycle number plates, and cycle insurance, said enthusiastically in support of what seems like another zombie government unicorn, "We want the UK to be at the forefront of developing and using this fantastic technology, and that is why we are investing millions in vital research into safety and setting the legislation to ensure we gain the full benefits that this technology promises." Now, I will be coming back to this, as I said, at the end of the show, so stay tuned, and I'll give you the benefits of my views at least, and I'm always, as I say, interested in feedback from anybody who listens to the show. So if you have any comments, any questions about any topic at all, I'm always happy to hear them. But I'm particularly interested in what you as motorcyclists think about the idea of sharing the roads with self-driving vehicles. So do drop me a line on that, and I will try to get back to you, probably not directly at the end of this show, because I'm being hurtling out to the door. Right, okay, so what else is in the news? Well, the supermarkets haven't endeared themselves to the big motoring organisations. Wholesale fuel costs have been coming down, but the AA and the RAC have slammed the big supermarket chains for making profits by not dropping their pump prices in line. Edmund King, the AA president, has described the situation as unforgivable and pointed out that the wholesale price of petrol has been falling steadily for over 2 months. The RAC's fuel spokesman, Simon Williams, called July an unnecessarily tough month for drivers and claimed supermarket chains had been failing to cut their petrol and diesel prices in line with those wholesale prices until forced to do so by the competition. Now, this is the interesting bit, because I mentioned on ELEVENSES a couple of weeks ago that I'd noticed that the cheapest fuel prices, whilst I was out and about on the bike and also in the car, were small independent petrol stations, and it seems that actually I was right. They were honestly reflecting the falling costs and probably doing quite well out of their sales, judging by the queues down the road that I saw at one of them. While the supermarkets and the big chain petrol stations have actually been holding up the prices at the pumps artificially. So the RAC's advice here: don't buy your fuel from the big supermarkets. Now, if you're a Twitter follower and you happen to have the dvla on your watch list, as I do, you'll read that quite a few tweets are being fired in their direction from frustrated learners and also parents of learners who have had one issue after the other with the driving test system. That's not entirely restricted to the private booking side of things. The trainer booking system is also a mess, and if you talk to driver trainers, you'll often find that they log in bang on the moment that the system opens, only to be found that they can't get any tests in their area. Now, the problem in this case, this particular Twitter conversation, was down to a test that was actually cancelled by the dvla themselves. And once they once the parent went online to check for a new date, they found that the first available date was actually several months into the future. The test had been booked months earlier, and basically there was no immediate retest available. And because of this, once the dvla cancelled the test and then left the parent to rebook, they found that the tests that they could get would mean that the candidate's theory test would have expired before they could actually get to the practical test. So basically, they would have to sit the theory test again because the dvla cancelled the test. Now, the rather irate parent pointed out that no explanation for the cancellation was given and suggested that DVSA rather, should extend the theory test to cover the date of the new test. Well, not surprisingly, of course, since they'd no legal power to do this, the DVSA actually declined to take that action. But whoever controlled the Twitter feed then rather unhelpfully implied that it was, if the parent couldn't find an earlier test, it was because they weren't searching the system correctly, suggesting that there were plenty of tests available before the theory test certificate expired. Now, the parent responded by saying they'd searched the various nearby towns for the test centres and they couldn't find anything. And it degenerated into a fairly angry exchange of Twitter messages on both sides. So in a way, it was no great surprise to discover the DVSA have actually launched a new online portal for customers who wish to make a complaint. They say, we are committed to providing a high quality of service to everyone, but you need to tell us if we get things wrong. We'll listen to your complaint and treat it seriously and in confidence. This new portal is part of our commitment to providing the best and most efficient service possible to customers, and you will be asked for necessary information up front as part of the complaint or feedback submission. This will make the process more efficient. Now, I'm entirely sure that one of the reasons that they've opened this portal is the treating it in confidence issue. What they really don't want, I suspect, is have people contacting them on Twitter in public and hanging their dirty washing out, as it were, for all to see. Now, the irony is that DVSA actually say that their goal is to provide a more efficient and excellent customer service. Now, I'm sure there are people who have a good experience with the DVSA. I've never had any problems myself, to be perfectly honest, but I am aware that complaints always sound louder than praise. But I can't help but feel that in this case that the the new portal is more likely to be delivering negative feedback than positive. It really is time the DVSA got on top of things and tidied things up. Right, okay, don't forget, if you want to catch this show, normally it does go out at 11 o'clock. Today's a special occasion because I'm scooting off to a barbecue all the way over in Suffolk in just a few minutes. Sundays and Wednesdays are the days you'll find me online, normally at 11, usually live. Very occasionally a recorded show goes out, and even more rarely I miss one altogether because I am not around to produce a show. So set your timetables. You can, of course, catch up on Facebook after the show's finished here, or you can find it over on YouTube, where I will upload it at the end of the show. So pop those in your timetable and be ready to come back for next Wednesday's show. Now, you may be wondering why it is that motorcycles owned by Steve McQueen keep appearing at auction. It's not the same one being sold over and over, although, of course, machines do get passed on from owner to owner. But the fact is, he did actually own around 200 motorcycles over the years. And the latest to appear was due to go under the hammer at the Bonham's Quail Lodge auction being held during Monterey Car Week in California. And this is what the bike looks like. This is a photo from Bonham's themselves. Let me just get that up on screen. There it is. This particular machine is a 1971 Husqvarna 400 Cross, and it's said to be the late actor's favourite off-road bike. Now, Bonhams say the bike was still in McQueen's possession at the time of his death, and it was one of his go-to bikes. It was sold as lot 664 at the Steve McQueen Estate auction at the Imperial Palace in Las Vegas in November 1984, and it's since passed through 3 subsequent owners before being acquired by the current vendor 11 years ago. Now, it says it's on sale with a certificate of authenticity plus the bill of sale issued to the buyer at the estate auction, and the original registration document, which comes in the name of Solar Productions, which presumably was Steve McQueen's company, it is also to hand. So the original auction tag is also there for the bike when it goes to the auction, which I believe was Friday. Now, the vendor claims it hasn't been ridden and is in the same state as the condition as when Steve McQueen actually owned it. And if you look very closely, what you can see is there is actually a spark plug there, actually gaffer taped to the frame. So, fairly unique and original machine there. It is actually similar to the one that was ridden in the 1971 documentary on Any Sunday. If you haven't actually seen that, go and dig it out. It is really, really good film, even though it is 50 years old. So the Husky off-roader sold in October 2018, also at Bonham's auction, for no less than $230,500. This machine is expected to fetch up to $150,000. I'm doing pretty patel with my numbers today. $150,000 this one is expected to fetch. So don't forget, if you do enjoy the show and you want to support me, you can pop over to my coffee page over there, Survival Skills on coffee.com, and £3 gets you access to all the old articles as well. So well worth the investment, in my opinion, of course, and it helps me keep producing these shows. So Terry has just popped in and he said, on Any Sunday, compulsory viewing for bikers. Let's get that banner off again. And I would absolutely agree with you there, Terry. It is actually a very good movie indeed. There we go. So even now, 2020, I think it's still worth a watch. Right, now I've covered the Coventry-based manufacturer of electric motorcycles, Mayving, a couple of times on 11s. Firstly, to look at their RM1 e-bike when it was launched to the press back in December last year. More recently, they gave Colin Dean, you may recall, the 90-year-old Francis Barnett test rider, his quick spin on their new production machine back in June when it was actually launched. Now, the interesting thing is that they have just gained some outside funding. They've got a deal to deliver £1 million of cash funding from Maven Debt Finance. They're part of the Midlands Engine Investment Fund and managed by Maven Capital Partners. Now, the idea of this is that the funding is aimed at smaller and medium-sized businesses which have high growth potential, and the cash is due to provide working capital to assist with the launch of the RM1 and to invest in the recruitment of marketing and engineering talent, and that will basically allow Maven to focus on further production and development alongside the current promotion of their RM1. They're looking at digital advertising media channels, apparently. So, some funding for a British-based company there. Will Stirrup, who is the Joint Chief Executive of Maven, said, "We are thrilled to have received the support from Maven at such an important time for the business. The investment will allow us to scale the business quickly, getting more people onto electric motorcycles at a crucial moment in the fight against climate change." Right, cool. So that's a fully British-built electric motorcycle, and whether you like the looks of it or not is debatable. But aside from Triumph, who've not pulled much of a secrecy cover over their full electric TE1 prototype, and leaving aside scooters, the mainstream manufacturers furthest along the curve towards a production-ready alternative to the internal combustion engine does appear to be Kawasaki. The Japanese manufacturer recently showcased 2 prototypes in advanced stages at the Suzuka 8-hour endurance race, and both machines were actually given a quick spin in front of a huge crowd at what is one of the world's most popular motorcycle racing events, one of the world's most popular motorcycling events, full stop. So this is the first machine that was apparently seen. Let's pop that one up. There it is. Now, there's no word on power outputs from either of the 2 machines that were on display, but this is the first bike that got a demo run, and it's a full electric powered Kawasaki, and it sports the sort of Z branding and design, and it appears to be an entry level commuter style motorcycle and is expected to compete against 125 ICE motorcycles. Now, power figures are, as I say, not released, but it's likely would be somewhere around the 15 PS mark, which is the legal learner limit in the UK and Europe. And whilst a 125 may not provide petrol head skeptics with much in the way of evidence that electricity is a viable mode of power anytime soon, there is a big and growing market for small electric machines for commuting. I regularly now see electric motorcycles out on the roads here in London. And not everyone, though, wants either a scooter or the kind of off-the-wall design that we've just seen from Maven. So that Kawasaki actually, I think, ticks the boxes of looking like a motorcycle. The hybrid model, which I'm just about to show you, gets a fairing and is much more in the sort of ninja style of sports motorcycle that we're kind of used to. Now, as previously speculated, the motor in this from the twin downpipes is thought to be based on the either the Ninja 300 or 400, and it's likely to have a sort of full-on ICE performance around the 40 horsepower mark. That would make sense. But the thing we have to remember is that 40 horsepower is actually sufficient to easily maintain a cruising speed of 100 miles per hour, even with 2 people on the bike. You're not using 40 horsepower to sit on the motorway at 100. And with the hybrid electric motor, you can use that motor alongside the ICE engine to boost acceleration. And the result is that with what appears to be a fairly small and lowly powered ICE engine bike, you get the performance of a much larger machine. Whilst at the same time, you actually still get, of course, the full electric capability, which allows you to cross sort of city centre green zones. So, no doubt, some commentators will be saying that these final designs are likely to be very different. Somebody said they're likely to be futuristic, I'm not so sure that's actually true, because I believe that one of the keys to mainstream acceptance of these motorcycles is actually to make them look like the existing family of motorcycles that each company designs. The May Ving may be a good example of sort of the neo retro design, but if you look at the sort of the feedback on motorcycle forums about those, you'll see that it's split at best between for and against that kind of style of motorcycle. And a significant amount of that negative feedback is it doesn't look like a proper motorcycle. So I don't think it's any coincidence at all that Triumph and their TE1 prototype, they actually hold on to significant amount of styling cues from their own recent range. So the other thing, of course, is that basing motorcycles on a conventional model actually should speed the rollout and make it cheaper to build. And that's important because the market is rapidly being dominated by Chinese and particularly Indian manufacturers. They're not just gaining a toehold. Excuse me. They're actually starting to seize a significant chunk of the sales. Dearie me. I've forgotten my antihistamine tablet again this morning. Now, there is actually speculation that these bikes could appear as production ready models as early as November this year at the big Milan show, and with a possible home market launch next year. So that's, as I say, is speculation, but it is it's a sign of how things are being worked. And Kevin says the hybrid for me. Yeah, I like the hybrid. I don't mind the little 125, but I probably want something a little bit bigger. Now, oh dear. A recurring theme on this show has been security. And as it happens, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about holiday security and suggested that we don't need to just pack a lock to stop the bike being rolled away. It's actually useful to have an inexpensive cable lock to just temporarily secure things, anything from a helmet, a tank bag, throw over panniers, even to thread through the arms and legs of clothing, just to lock it to the bike. Now, it won't, obviously, a cable lock won't withstand even a vaguely determined attack by anybody with anything like a tool, but it will stop someone actually simply lifting your helmet off the mirror, your panniers off the back of the bike, or whipping your jacket off the rack where you've left it to air while you have a cup of coffee over the road. And of course, it won't stop somebody riffling through your panniers or your tank bag, which makes me wonder, incidentally, why they don't have integral locks on them. But what it will do is it will stop somebody simply picking it up and nicking it while your back's turned. So hats off really here to Oxford. I do give them a bit of a hard time sometimes for some of their very expensive products. This is the Combi Zip Lock, and it's designed as basically like a zip tie. You push one end through the other bit and pull tight, and then pop it on to lock it. The lock is only a 3-digit combination, so it's not going to take Einstein to crack that. And the stainless steel core won't defeat sort of 15-foot long bolt cutters. But it's, as I say, for a quick bit of cheap, inexpensive security that you can carry easily, it's just 73 grams. And although it's half a meter long, it'll kind of roll up to nothing. And you could even leave it hung on a sort of grab rail or something ready to use. So it's $12.99, and yeah, I agree, it's not going to beat the lock cracking lawyer, but frankly, that's not its job. It's a piece of security to defeat the opportunist thief, and I think at that price is actually quite reasonable. So okay. Terry, what does Terry say? Let's read what Terry says. I'm not at all convinced that the answer to global warming is removing already quite economic ICE engine motorcycles with hybrids or full electric powered bikes. Yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from. With small capacity motorcycles, obviously, we're not using a lot of fuel. But the problem is still one of pollution. There are still emissions to deal with, and motorcycles are not exempt to the regulations, of course, in parts of the world like London, where if you have an older machine, you are still paying the congestion, not the congestion charge, the low emission zone charge, just like a car. So yes, you can do a job of persuading politicians that small capacity motorcycles are acceptable. The problem is when you get up to the 500, 600, 700cc bracket, and you start to find that the motorcycles are actually less fuel efficient than something like a Toyota Aygo. And they also destroy tires, of course. May only have two tires, but they destroy them several times faster than a car will destroy tires. So, and particulates from tires and brake pads are particularly nasty, and they are a particular area of concern in pollution. So to say that motorcycles are cleaner as a blanket statement is incorrect. It does need qualifying, and unfortunately the motorcycle industry does little to correct these misapprehensions that motorcyclists have, that because they're riding a bike they are cleaner than somebody driving a small petrol engined car on 4 long-lasting tires. So there we go. There is a room, I think, for both. And certainly, I think if we look at hybrids, I think we possibly could get the best of both worlds for motorcycles rather than just full electric. Anyway, back to the opening story, the fully autonomous self-driving vehicles, which are now set to appear, public consultation notwithstanding, on roads within 3 years, potentially without even a driver aboard to monitor what the vehicle is doing. Now, to me, I would say that seems like an astonishingly short time frame to even contemplate this technology. As a motorcyclist, the question that immediately leaps into my mind is whether the risks for powered two-wheeler riders are about to go up another notch. Now, we already have to watch out for drivers who don't see us and turn across our path, but will we now have to watch our backs too for the autonomous vehicle that hasn't spotted our bike braking in the road ahead, or when over our shoulders to watch out for that autonomous vehicle that hasn't noticed we're in the adjacent lane? Now, the benefit claimed, of course, is road safety, but then there are two immediate questions that need to be asked. The first is, how mature is the autonomous technology? And secondly, how can someone who can't drive, and that's one of the proposals here, is to allow people with no license to be in these vehicles, how can someone who can't drive take over if the car's autonomous features malfunction? Now, personally, I think the answer to the first question about the technology's maturity is miles away, and the second one about occupants who aren't drivers assuming control in emergencies is they can't. Now, it's fine for people to point up, as they regularly do. I have a friend who keeps pointing me in the direction of automated vehicles. It works well on something like the Docklands Light Railway. It works well for quarry trucks. It even works for buses plying very strictly limited routes in controlled areas like the one I showed you earlier. But letting driverless vehicles loose in an environment where they now have to cope with the predictably unpredictable human element, it really is another matter altogether. You might think that the public consultation is going to ask the questions and listen to opinions, but frankly, my experience of public consultations, bypass that was due to be built, was that what happened was they canvassed opinions in order to cherry pick those opinions that supported what they wanted to do, whilst playing down all the fears from people who didn't agree with what they wanted to do. And in this case, it's also very hard to see how anybody who is not an expert in the field can have anything meaningful to say other than doing what I'm doing, which is to point out quite firmly that it's down to the manufacturer to prove beyond doubt that autonomous vehicles work as built before they're let loose on the road. And it's down to the government to mandate that standards are met. Now, this is where I spy a problem, because the safety ambition of the consultation has the stated aim of discovering, quote, how this technology can be as safe as a competent and careful human driver. Now, tell me what you have heard previously about autonomous vehicles. Have you not heard that they are much safer than human drivers. Here, we have a tacit admission that we are still trying to reach the point at which those vehicles are as safe as a competent and careful human driver. In other words, they're not yet as safe as humans. Now, I think autonomous vehicles should be better than a safe and competent driver. Otherwise, it's hard to see how the goals of improved safety can be achieved. They become pie in the sky. Now, a standard that only seems to want to match humans, to me, really does seem to suggest that actually matching a human behind the wheel is actually a much harder task than was previously admitted, that human performance as a driver is a really high bar for automation to actually approach, let alone meet and then surpass. Now, interestingly, after I wrote this piece ready for today's show a couple of days ago, the BBC, of course, also covered the story, and they said that a report from the the Centre of Data Ethics and Innovation, they told the BBC that it might not be enough for self-driving cars to be safer than normal cars. It says the public may have little tolerance for driverless car crashes, even if they are safer on average. Well, I think that's absolutely true. It's absolutely bloody right, in fact, because at least partly because the way that drivers are consistently blamed for crashes because they've made a human error, and because of the way that driverless vehicles have been pushed over the last few years. The implication has always been if you take the human out of the vehicle, you remove the errors. And the result is people will expect driverless vehicles to be nigh on perfect, and many, myself included, will see the aims simply to match careful and competent drivers as a real admission of failure of automation. Now, assuming that self-driving cars are actually still light years away, light years is distance, isn't it? Not time, but you know what I mean. And the technology will be limited to specific vehicles in specific circumstances. In the first case, it's still difficult to see how something even as simple as a bus, which follows a standard route, could work without full separation from other traffic. And if that's the case, then of course it's really a train without tracks. It essentially becomes the Docklands Light Railway without the rails. Now, I know, as I said, there are quarries worked by autonomous trucks, there are robot forklifts roaming huge warehouses and things, and they've been working on controlled routes, on timetables. They are pre-programmed. They are working in zones free of random movements. And if we go back a few months, you may recall that I covered a collision between an autonomous bus working on a very limited route in the Olympic Village and a visually impaired athlete who walked into the bus's path. The bus apparently wasn't programmed to expect that to happen. So, if buses on limited routes are a possibility, buses roaming the streets autonomously seem unlikely, and I'm even less convinced we're going to see driverless delivery trucks zipping your Amazon parcels down the road to your front door anytime soon either. Now, some people will undoubtedly be reassured to hear that the government are claiming to be backing their vision for self-driving vehicles to the tune of £100 million, including no less than 34 million for research on safety issues such as how self-driving cars perform in poor weather conditions. That's one of the features of the research that's done by Google car, which we haven't heard much of recently, actually. It all took place in fair weather in California. And how they interact with other road users, vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, for example. Excuse me. But speaking frankly, 34 million for this is a derisory amount. The Tesla spent almost 1.5 billion US dollars in 2020 on research and development. And although that obviously covers all areas of their car development, they are only one manufacturer, and it gives you a flavor of how much cash they are actually spending to get new Teslas on the road. Now, if the current limitations on what are allowed on the road is lifted, I have a real worry that the public roads are actually going to be used as a test bed for immature technology, something that tests themselves are arguably guilty of. The autonomous element of any self-driving vehicle is only going to be as good in the first instance as the programmer's imagination, and it will only improve via the data that's collected by the vehicles as they are trialed. So if they don't experience a particular issue and the program hasn't thought of it in the first place, that vehicle doesn't have any artificial intelligence that will allow it to predict what happens next. Now, Tesla have been busy pushing safety claims onto the road to suggest that their cars are safer on autopilot, and they've done that based on crashes per mile, where Teslas have fewer crashes per mile than ordinary cars. But I did have a look at their claims, their data, and it appears that the vast majority of the miles clocked up by Teslas, over 90%, are on what are described as controlled access roads. In other words, these are the roads where all the traffic moves in single direction within one carriageway, is barriered off from traffic going in the opposite direction, and there are only limited access points. So we would probably call them motorways. The Americans probably call them freeways. And the fact is, if you look at those kind of roads, they have considerably fewer collisions per mile on average than other roads in both the US and the UK. But they took that data from those controlled roads and they compared it to all vehicle crashes on all types of roads, and that is how they got their safer than human figures. When you trim out the non-motorway crashes, the non-freeway crashes from the human-driven mileage, then the Tesla's autopilot turns out to be somewhat less safe than the average human driver. But what about the claim that new legislation will also hold manufacturers responsible for the vehicle's actions when self-driving, meaning that a human driver would not be liable, for instance, when the vehicle is in control? Well, it's no great consolation, I would suggest, to those dead and injured to know that the occupant of that vehicle wasn't the guilty party. But the usual way these things work is that the resulting fine is actually a slap on the wrist in terms of the company's finances. So frankly, what is to deter a company from putting out a beta product on the road and steadily refining it with data being gained from those incidents? Now, to be honest, speaking as a motorcyclist here and knowing that I am one of the more vulnerable road users, the idea that the public are being used as guinea pigs is both horrifying and terrifying at the same time. Now, you'll recall last month I reported on 2 crashes, both caused by Tesla's autopilot failing to identify motorcycles, and both of which are under investigation by the National Highways and Transport Safety Administration in the US. Now, to my mind, the only really positive part of the UK government statement is that by setting standards, it will be a legal requirement that vehicles need to meet the set standard to be allowed to self-drive on the roads. And if these vehicles turned out not to meet the standards, those manufacturers could face sanctions. But again, what are they worth? I have extreme doubts, I'll be perfectly honest, that we'll see fully autonomous cars being driven by unqualified occupants anytime soon. But another line in the government announcement did catch my eye, and this was the new laws for the safe rollout of the self-driving vehicles by 2025 will be brought forward when parliamentary time allows. When or if? We'll quickly see if this is yet another flying pig, for mixing my metaphors, marking the final days of the Johnson cabinet. But whether the measure gets airtime before Johnson goes and presumably takes Shapps with him, there is another debate to be had, one aside from the safety questions, and that is if bus and truck drivers find themselves out of work and replaced by automation, that's another tier of jobs lost in the drive to increase profit. And I won't even begin to go near the political implications of that. Right, we do have some comments here. Now let me have a look and see what I can see about these. Kevin asks if there's a gadget which would make us more conspicuous to an autonomous vehicle. Well, the answer here is the Internet of Things, where all vehicles talk to each other. That's still a long way off. And of course, as we have mixed mode transport, with some vehicles being fitted with systems that can talk, other vehicles, of course, that are entirely dumb, and the infrastructure is not fitted at the roadside yet anyway. We are struggling. We're going to struggle to get that across the board anytime soon. Decades would be my guess rather than years. Now, Terry says bikers might have a fighting chance of being detected by autonomous vehicles if the bikes are equipped with a transponder. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm just talking about. The problem is, of course, the pool of old machines. Are you going to get them retrofitted? Who knows? Terry also says the aviation industry has learnt how difficult it can be to have aircraft avoid each other in the air. Yes, the tactical collision avoidance systems, TCAS. Yeah, absolutely. There are still near misses, unfortunately, even collisions. And again, I'm not an expert on airline safety, though I do take an interest in watching what's going on because it's often a pointer as to how driver safety will go in 20 or 30 years' time. One of the issues has been airliners which have all the automated safety systems existing in the same airspace as light aircraft, which are basically visual flight rules, where you look for other aircraft around you and you avoid them when you see them. You're mixing and matching two completely different technologies in very much the same way that autonomous vehicles and human-driven vehicles will operate on the road. Nick says the situation was worse before TCAS. I'm absolutely sure it was, Nick. However, the problem is that just as autonomous vehicles are likely to be safer in the long run than human-driven vehicles, it's putting the two together, which is going to be a bit of a minefield. Right, okay, so Kevin says, owner of an autonomous car told me vehicles need painted lines to self-position in lanes. Yes, that has been a problem. I know that cars have drifted out of lanes because the paint has worn out. You know, again, the ramifications here are enormous. You know, is the government going to back funding to go and repaint all the lines on all the roads? I sort of was trying to follow some lanes the other day and completely lost the plot because they've been worn out. Yeah, transponders could be fitted to helmets. Well, they could. You might be able to do that quicker than actually fitting them to bikes. But again, you're patching the situation. And yes, I do watch Flight Radar 24. It's quite fascinating. Anyway, that is it. I need to get off. I'm off to a barbecue later today, so back on Wednesday at the normal time. Thanks to everybody for their comments today. I'll try and do some written comments, but that will be after I get back, I think. So yeah, okay, thank you again for looking in. Always great to see people, and I hope those who hope to come in live and discovered I was running an hour ahead of schedule today aren't too disappointed to catch the show recorded. Do spread the word, do let people know about this show. If you feel I've brought up some interesting stuff, talk about it on your own social media feeds, and hopefully we can get a few more people watching the show over the next months. So if you are out there on your bike today, I'll be in the car because I've got a big cake to carry with me, thanks to my lovely assistant. If you are out there on the bike, do make sure that you stay shiny side up.